Hello and welcome to the Young Film Academy podcast, the essential podcast for teenagers looking to find their way into the creative industries. I'm joined with my co-host James Walker this time. How's it going, James?
Very good, Dan. Lovely to be here again. And today we are talking with an old friend of mine, and we're talking music. Are you feeling musical, Dan? Don't sing. No, I knew you were going to do that.
Okay.
No.
Yes. Yes is the answer.
Do it in words.
Okay.
No, we love you singing.
Dum.
So, yeah, we're talking music today, and we're talking music editing, which is actually something I really know nothing about. I got to sit down with Jack last year, and we talked about this, and he was explaining a little bit to me about his role, and he has done tons of incredible movies, and so we're really lucky that he's going to come and share some of his experience with us and shine a light again on an area of the industry that I don't know tons about. So Jack has done an amazing amount of work. He had a long-standing relationship and still has with the director Mathew Vaughn. So he's done many of those movies, including the Kingsman movies, Kickass. I'm just looking at his CV. We've got Captain America, Eddie the Eagle, the music for. He did, what have we got here? Rush, Puss in Boots, Farmageddon, Shaun the Sheep Farmageddon, which is just great. So he's done absolutely tons of stuff, including working on the Star Wars franchise, which we will definitely ask him about, right?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, literally so many big franchises, movies that you have heard of most of his CV, or if not all of it, I promise you. So this is very exciting. So, without any further ado,
let's do it. Welcome to the pod, Jack.
I am absolutely delighted to be here, guys. Thank you so much for having me, really.
First of all, where do we find you right at this moment?
So this is my studio away from home. This is actually the Wicked cutting rooms. So I'm currently working on the film version of Wicked the musical. It's a 2-part movie. It's going to be a long process. We're at the very beginning of it, and this is my studio / editing room here in Toluca Lake, California, the Wicked cutting rooms. And this is one of many rooms in this building that lots of activity are happening inside.
So for people at home, what we're looking at is screens and tons of buttons, and it looks very kind of cool recording, low lights. It's very atmospheric.
Yeah, I'm very jealous. I'm so jealous. The last couple of things I've worked on, I've been either sort of horizontal in my bed or sort of crammed into a cold corner on a set and sort of like been sort of working away.
Well,
so that looks luxurious.
Well, thank you. I will say that editing rooms for movies tend to be incredibly drab and white walls, fluorescent lights. So I'm very grateful to have this space because it's comfortable and I feel creative and happy to be here and happy to be away from home here. I have a studio at home as well, so it would take a lot to get me out of that environment and into another one. So it's a great space.
Well, this is so great, and I'm very excited because I'm a big sound person. I love music and sound in movies and TV. I mean, I remember when I was learning craft, and everyone would say, it's sort of, they said, don't forget sound. It might be sort of 70% visuals, but it's a 30%, and I just don't think that's true. And then you get people say it's 50-50, and I don't think it is. I actually think sound is a more important feature of the envelopment process of losing yourself in a world. But hey-ho, that's tangible. We'll come back to it. So
I agree.
I was looking at your CV, and it's absolutely unbelievable. It's one great movie after another. We'll talk about a few of these. But I did see on it, we've got Solo, the Star Wars movie. So maybe, a lot of our listeners will have seen that particularly. So can you just give me a sense of what it was like to work on that particular movie and what you were doing on that movie?
Well, that project was a once-in-a-lifetime dream come true. Because it was part of the Star Wars world, and who doesn't want to be part of the Star Wars world at some point with the heritage of that franchise and those characters. But for me, as a music editor who works a lot alongside composers, it was even more of a dream come true because that film was the score was composed by John Powell, the great English film composer, but the great maestro John Williams was brought on to write a new theme for Han Solo. And so I got on that project to work with John Powell, but also with John Williams, which was truly a mind-blowing experience that I'll never forget. And seeing him look at the picture and seeing his process for how music can tell story in a certain moment, or what we need to do to the picture in order to accommodate music, or vice versa, and just being in his head for the brief time that I was able to be was unbelievable.
Yeah, what a privilege that is.
Yeah, it was a real privilege, really. Absolutely. But yeah, so I'm a music editor, and I like to say that that music editors figure out what role and shape music should have in a film, how to tell story with music. And I'm not talking about songs that might be chosen in a movie. I'm talking about the orchestral underscore that you hear in a film that creates the sort of heartbeat and emotional fabric of the project. And there's many different facets to music editing that we can get into, but I guess the headline is that we figure out what role that type of underscore should play and where it should be put in a film and how to shape it in order for the narrative effect to be as great as possible, and also the emotional effect too.
Cool. So I think that music editing, it's funny actually, at Young Film Academy courses, we often we try and demystify some of the terminologies of roles on film sets and things. And you start off at schools, when we go into some schools, you start with the big ones. What does a producer do? And inevitably you get hands up. Yes, they produce. What does a director do? They direct. And it's like, yeah, okay. But then you start to pull some of those apart. So I suppose my first reaction to music editing, and I really don't know within the sound department, so I'm fascinated to hear this. Music editing sounds like, my first guess would be, you have the music, like a video editor, picture editor would take the pictures and then sort of reorganize them on a timeline to tell the story in the best possible way. But from our conversations a little bit in the past, I don't think it is that. It's a much longer journey and you're involved from the beginning. So I suppose let's start with that. Like, demystify, like, what is it, brass tacks? When do you get involved in a project? What are you actually doing? Are you on the set? When do you get in? What are you there to do? Let's go for music editing.
It's a great question, and it's a kind of complicated answer only because the music editor is part of the project in different stages, and you can be brought on in one of those stages or in one of the later stages or for all of them. It depends. Generally speaking, the first thing a music editor will be asked to do on a movie after the movie is shot, and as the dailies and the picture are starting to be assembled by the editor, is to create what's called the temp score. And so you're looking at these images for the very first time. Everything's rough. The editor is starting to put them together and create sequences and scenes. And for the very first time, the question, what music would work here, gets asked. And when that question is asked, you literally have a number of possibilities.
Go on Spotify.
You can look at you can look at a scene. It's actually overwhelming, and I have whenever I am asked to do a temp score, the first 2 weeks there's a whole bunch of self-doubt and horror involved, because you can look at a scene and put in one type of music and the scene will play one way. You can put in another kind of music and the scene will play completely differently. And both of those approaches might be compelling and appropriate. It really comes down to what the director's vision is for the scene. When I look at this character, am I wanting to play the scene from her point of view? Do I want the music to support what she's feeling in this moment? Do I want the music to support what the audience is feeling in this moment and subvert what the characters are feeling? Or do I want the music to do two things at once and play one character's feelings and then another character's feelings all at the same time? So these questions are asked for the very first time when you're doing the temp score. And because the composer hasn't started yet, and generally won't start for quite some time, the only fodder you have is the history of film music. And so I have a giant 6 terabyte library of pretty much every score you've ever heard. And
wow.
I will start playing around with ideas. Maybe this sweet piece from John Williams would be something to try. Maybe this tense piece from a horror movie might be something to try. And you just start throwing things at the wall, and little by little you make discoveries, and you follow the trail of breadcrumbs, and then before you know it, you have a version of a scene, and it just goes like that. And you're working back and forth with the editor and the director at that stage, and they're figuring it out too. Everyone's trying to figure out what the tone of a scene should be, and it's incredibly creative, that part of the process. It's one of my most favorite parts because nobody has answered these questions yet, and you are part of the process of answering those questions.
That's
that's the first stage.
So you're literally getting a rough cut. So I suppose but I think that you come on board often before that, don't you, where you have discussions before even the shoot started sometimes, or do you mostly come on where there's stuff in the can and sort of there is a temp edit?
For me, the earliest I've ever been brought on was on this show, Wicked, and that's because it's a musical and there's on-camera singing and songs that have been pre-recorded, and so it's beneficial to have the music editor start right at the beginning of shooting so that as dailies are coming in, you can start the process of shaping the songs, and then if you need to kind of create score around them, you can start that process. I've never started on a project before the shoot in pre-production, generally because there's really not much for a music editor to do at that stage. And most people will start in post-production once the shoot has already finished, because that's when the scenes are starting to be assembled for the first time.
Gotcha. And I think the exciting thing, actually, for many of our young filmmakers who come on courses and things, they find that what you're describing is the process of laying temp, which for them often is laying the music for their movies. I mean, that is such an exciting moment for them when they create a scene and then they find a piece of non-copyright music. We have to be very big on this because young people want to take a Beyonce track, stick it on, and then YouTube pulls it, and then they want to enter it for a festival and they can't. So that's a whole thing which we won't deal with here. So sure. we provide them with libraries of copyright-free music they can use. But when they first start putting that music down and they see the impact on a sequence, oh my God, it's like it lives. It's so exciting, right, Dan? I mean, you'll attest to that firsthand in the room.
No, for sure. This is relevant. Oh my God, this is relevant. But I keep thinking, I wonder if a sound editor or a music editor put the Duel of Fates in the sort of second Star Wars movie, whether they did that first and then John Williams was like, "That's genius," or whether that was always meant to be there, because that's sort of like a reprisal from the previous movie, and it's like it's such an exciting moment where you can sort of. It brings it to life. You create parallels with other films, and it starts to build the association of the kind of emotion that you're going for with movies, right?
It's funny you mention that, Dan, because John Williams, more than any composer I've ever worked with, is very complimentary and supportive of the temp process, especially when it comes to the reuse of his own music.
Interesting.
One must follow a whole bunch of rules when you're using the Star Wars canon music, because they are certain themes. It's a rich glossary of themes, and they have to be used for specific reasons. And on Solo, we had a scene and the music cue that ended up getting written later was called Reminiscence Therapy. That's what we called it, because the whole scene took place in the interior of the Millennium Falcon. And what I was tasked to do was go back to Star Wars episodes 4 and 5 and find the scenes that looked similar and had a similar feeling and nostalgia, and extract the exact music that was used for those scenes. And then take all that music and string together a new piece of music based on that would work over these new scenes. And it was such fun to have access to all of that. And it was exactly the sort of thing that you were describing. Although I will say Duel of the Fates is one of the all-time great music cues.
Oh my God. I sometimes put it on the tube home, and it makes for a very dramatic tube journey. It's one of my favorite pieces of music ever. But it sounds like it's incredibly fun to work on sequels in a way that you initially think, oh, well, you're sort of retreading a lot of stuff, but actually you get to draw so many lines between things.
That's right.
And the playfulness almost expands outwards in a way.
Yes, and ultimately what you're doing in that temp process is you're trying to lay a roadmap for the composer who will come on later. And so to be able to use that pre-existing music and to do it in an artful and musical way. You can't just slap them together. You have to figure out how the transitions will work, what chords and keys are being used, and how you can get from one place to another. But if you do that in a successful way, it gives the composer a very effective map to be able to then write the original music, adapt the original themes that might have been reused, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's a lot of fun doing that kind of work.
Wow. And I suppose part of that process you're saying is the enormity of the choice is overwhelming. It's like a blank page, right, when you first start. But as soon as because the temp is, as much as it's saying it could be like this, it's saying it's not everything else. And I suppose so that's the process, isn't it? It's like honing out the marble, the shape from the marble. You're just starting.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I couldn't agree with you more. That I love when a director or an editor says the word no a lot more than I like when they say the word yes, because something that they like might change. But when somebody doesn't like something or when it doesn't feel right in a scene, it generally will always be wrong for the scene. And by doing that, you are stripping away, in many cases, an entire corner of the film music library and saying,
they go 4 terabytes.
That's right. That's right. Like I can say, I now don't have to look in the Danny Elfman folder ever again because I know that this is just not the right thing, even though he's a genius. Or so you're quite right. And whittling away and trying to converge on something is a huge part of the exercise when you're temping. That's right.
So much fun. Okay, so sorry, Dan, go ahead.
I was just going to say, from a technical perspective, obviously you mentioned layering the tracks and sort of working out what chords you need to transition either between tracks or out of tracks. So am I right in thinking you're sort of taking this existing music and putting it in, but then adding a layer of your own stuff on top? It's how does it work? And does that vary from film to film?
That's exactly right. I can get into all the technical elements of what I do inside of Pro Tools, which is the software that I spend basically my whole life in front of. But essentially, in the kind of work I like to do, I don't generally get lucky where one piece of music will just transition to the next piece of music and then Bob's your uncle. Sometimes that happens and it's the stars align. But most of the time, there's work that needs to be done in order for things to be musical and to connect. And sometimes that's as simple as changing the key, transposing a piece of music, knocking it down 1 or 2 semitones from A major to G major, because you know that the incoming cue that you're trying to get to, by the way, cue is what we call a piece of music, a piece of underscore in a film. When you're trying to get to the next cue that happens to be in G, okay, maybe the outgoing one needs to be dropped down. Or sometimes you need to stretch it and make it longer because the tempo doesn't agree with the incoming piece of music. Or sometimes you need to add a layer because it's almost right, but it's not quite right. It sounds okay, but wouldn't it be nice if there was an added element of something that cuts into it or that creates an additional dimension of emotion? And so then I've got a library of sounds and things. I'll add maybe a single violin note that is discordant and adds tension. Lots of things like that we call them sweeteners, will be added to pieces of music in order to get it closer to the intended effect that you're looking for.
And technically the software can literally take a piece of music that's written in, let's say, a particular key, and you can on that software just go, no, I want that in the key of G, and it just moves the entire piece up and it sounds great, like it was written in G.
There's a tool in Pro Tools that was developed about, 10 years ago, and it's called Elastic Audio. And I spend my life in Elastic Audio because essentially what it does is you have your audio and you can easily manipulate it. You can manipulate the key, you can manipulate the length and the tempo, and you can do it literally like a piece of clay. You see the piece of audio change and reshape. And it's a wonderful tool for just being able to quickly get things where you need them to be. So yes, Pro Tools gives you that and many, many other tools for manipulating audio to get the desired effect.
Is that like I've only used Logic, but I know they've got a tool called Flex Pitch, which I feel like
very similar.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. And when you put a track in and you're manipulating it like that, are you just dealing with like a single sort of stereo file, or does in your library do you get different sort of do you have like the drums separately to say the violins, like the different stems, or are you having to try and work out through it just through one track?
Most of my library consists of just the soundtrack or the complete score, which would be a collection of stereo pieces of music. But oftentimes I'll draw from the projects that I've been a part of. And for those projects, I have what we call the stems. Dan already used that word, which would be all the constituent parts of a piece of music. So depending on how wide those stems are, we can have the strings separate from the brass, separate from the percussion, separate from synth elements, separate from drum machine elements, choir, whatever. And when I have access to that material, then the world of possibilities increases.
Because you could just use the choral element from a movie you'd previously worked on and get rid of everything else, or some equivalent.
That's right. And the process of using stems on a project becomes relevant and crucial in the later stages of the film music editing process on a movie. So we talked about step one, which is the temp score. And then when the composer gets hired and you start working with the composer, then you're working not with your library, but you're working with the original music. And some composers I work with, Henry Jackman's a good example, we have enough trust where he will give me all the individual parts, and I can work with those parts to see what would happen if we used the music in other parts of the movie, extract certain elements, reshape something so that it becomes something slightly different. I like to call it compositional collage. You're taking a piece of music and you're manipulating the parts so that you create something new, but it's all based on the material that's pre-existing. And that becomes the creative process in stage two when you're working with the composer.
So fun. I mean, yeah, it's so much fun. Because you actually are creating instant effect by putting this temp score in. It's having a huge impact. But actually, I don't mean but compared to the shoot element of having all the human beings necessary in the world or the studio to do all the shooting bit, you can do it pretty quickly, right? I mean, how long might it take you to create the temp score for a particular movie?
Well, whenever a studio tries to hire me to do a temp score, they say, we need a temp score in 2 weeks. I always say no to those jobs. And the reason is, maybe I'm just slow, but I need a week at the minimum for research and development. The first part of the process for me is spending 10 hours a day just listening to music and building a library that I think might be kind of in the right wheelhouse. And I park all of those pieces of music off to the side in my Pro Tools session, and I build a kind of palette. There are some music editors who are so good at temp and have so much experience that they can hit the ground running on day one, and they just have a knowledge of their library that they know. But for me, I need to immerse myself in...
And you can't listen to music at double time. I mean, you can't do the equivalent of listen to it at 4 speed, which video editors will do.
It's not like this podcast that some people might decide to hit the little time skip button as with books on audiobooks.
Can you do it like? Can you listen whilst doing some yoga or like going to the shops? So like, does the research part happen out and about, or for you does it need to happen in a studio in that sort of focused space?
Sometimes there will be moments of clarity in the car, when I'm listening to something. But for the most part, it's in the studio because it needs to be, even though it's listening to music, and we all love and appreciate listening to music, there's a mindset that goes with listening to music in a deliberate, focused, determined way because you're trying to achieve a goal. And for me, I need to get myself in that space. And also the tools I use for auditioning music mean that I can quickly bang through just hundreds of pieces, and I'm always looking at the waveform of the piece of music, the wave. And when you get more experience as a music editor, you start to be able to look at a waveform and just know immediately that's not the right thing I'm looking for.
Wow. Well, is that over the picture at this stage, or is this without picture?
Most of the time it's away from picture. Maybe I'll put a frame on the screen just to get inspired by somebody's look or an establishing shot of a place that needs to be acknowledged with the music. But for the most part, I like to try to process my interpretation of what I've seen away from the picture, put together a bunch of music that I think might work, and then, and only then, start using it. If you rush to put music against the movie, I think you're skipping an important intuitive phase, which is watch the thing, walk away from it, internalize it, and try to come up with an idea of what it needs to be, rather than just trying stuff. It's like, remember video stores when you'd have to go in to get, I remember you'd go into if you didn't know what movie you wanted to rent, you'd be stuck in there for an hour. But if before you went into the video store, you said, oh, I want to watch Die Hard. Then you walk in and you walk out, you've already had the idea. And it's a similar thing with temping a movie. I think you need to have a sense of what it is you're trying to do before you then do it.
It's a sad fact, Jack, that almost all listeners to this podcast will not understand what you mean by a video store. They will be like, what?
I've aged myself.
What is a video store? So, people, this was a physical shop you used to go into with VHS tapes in a long line, and it used to have a poster and some blurb on the back and a couple of photographs, and that was how you made your choice about the video you rented. And then you physically took it back to them.
To be honest with you, it's the same thing today, though, and I'll only spend a couple more seconds on this analogy. If I go into Netflix and I don't know what it is I'm hoping to achieve, then I just end up scrolling through, and then before I've chosen anything, I'm exhausted and I no longer want to watch anything.
Yeah, fatigue.
And so it's like if my wife and I say, okay, we want to watch a romantic comedy, or we should watch a Coen Brothers movie tonight. At least then you have an objective when you go into the app, So it's actually not dissimilar to the
100%. Okay, so let's back to the process, because I love I'm picking this because I think this always gets skipped over and people. So we've shot a movie. Dan shot a movie. It's a great movie, and he's given you the rough cut. And Jack, you'd be lucky, Jack. I mean, Dan. Jack then takes this movie, and you go through a process of listening to lots of music. You then create a temp score for this. And then what's the next part of that process? That gets shared with the director. What happens then?
Well, the director is going to be an integral part of making the temp score. That's the first time that they will have the chance to present their vision of the scenes tonally. And so you're going to be going back and forth with the editor and the director to arrive at the temp score.
So almost every scene you're saying, bit like this, bit like this. Okay.
And hopefully it's interactive and you have a lot of back and forth, and it can be collaborative and creative in that way. The purpose of the temp score is being able to show the movie to the people that matter, the bosses, or to an audience, to give them a sense of where the process is, to get notes from an audience or notes from the studio and all of the executives at the studio before the composer gets brought on, as a way to judge the director's cut and take the movie into the next stage. So the temp score becomes the reason that you can show the music with some semblance of show the movie with some semblance of music before the original music starts to get brought in.
So interesting.
So then, so we have our temp score. We show it to the studio. They might give some notes on the cut. Maybe there's another round of editing. And then we go into stage 2, which is the composer gets hired and brought on, and they get to see the movie for the first time. And we have what's called a spotting session. And a spotting session is basically where you sit down with the composer and the director, and usually the editor and also the music editor, and you arrive at a bunch of decisions on where music should start, where music should end, and what kind of music, what kind of tone, what kind of feeling the music should provide. And hopefully the temp score is an effective roadmap, as I said before, to have that conversation during the spotting session. And sometimes the composer will be inspired by the temp. Sometimes the composer will reject the temp and want to do something completely different. And that can often be a wonderful thing, because you've gotten stuck with looking at things one way. And the reason you hire a composer is because they are hoping to provide a new viewpoint on music. So but yeah, so then we go into the process of working with the composer.
So can I just pause you there, Jack? Because actually there's so much to unpack here. It's fascinating. I love this stuff. So in independent movie land, the danger of temp is that it's often better than anything you end up with when you engage your composer, because an independent filmmaker uses as temp John Williams, some amazing scores, big orchestras, fantastic composers. They temp that to their movie. They then engage a composer who's paid very little money to do it on their own in their bedroom, and therefore what you end up with
£5.
What you end up with at the end is a huge letdown compared to the size and scale of the temp. Now, I know in British in your world that's not going to be an issue because they're not. You get the orchestras and you do it all to scale. But do you ever get involved where the temp sort of ends up being kind of difficult to beat?
I think that part of the role of a good, experienced filmmaker or music editor is to understand the nuance and the politics and the budgets such that what you're describing doesn't happen. You should know what kind of movie you're working on. You should know what kind of budget there is for a composer, and you should avoid the forbidden cues because you know that people will fall in love with them. And even on big budget movies, we have the forbidden cues. You know, I could tell you a few of what in my world of music editors.
Go on, share. What can you not do?
You just don't put it. Well, Duel of the Fates would be a great example because no one's ever going to create anything remotely like that. It's such a unique and powerful piece of music. There's one that we often joke about, though, which is there's a cue that Hans Zimmer wrote from The Thin Red Line, which is such an arresting and compelling piece of music that anytime it gets put in a film, it's so hard to beat that it can create problems with the composer. You're doing a disservice to the composer. Also, one of Hans's Zimmer gets put in this category a lot because he writes such memorable music and people love what it does to the movie. The last cue from Inception is another. The cue time from Inception is another one that you should probably stay away from.
I've seen that used in temps quite a few times.
Yeah, I mean, you put it on there and all of a sudden you're like, I've just made the greatest movie in history. and so that's not fair to a composer. And then you end up with a temp rip, which is never going to be as good. And it also limits the creative ability, the creative possibilities of hiring a composer. So yes, but for the independent filmmakers out there, what I would suggest is trying to stick with music that has been used in similar scale films and music that may be a little bit more minimal. What's expensive is a 50-piece orchestra. What's less expensive is an indie score with some acoustic guitar and piano. So that's sort of the answer to that question is just stay away from the big stuff and also use library music like what you were alluding to earlier, James. There's a lot of great stuff that can be used from these one-shot license kind of libraries. So
yeah, great. I think it's a great tip. So think of scale and budget when you're working on your indie project. I think that's a great note. And the second thing, do you find that because you have an enormous amount of influence, I think. The person who creates the temp often is the one you're laying in the minds of the key creatives. They're kind of like, they fall in love with it. We see that. Those first things that you like, it tends to it takes a lot of momentum and energy to shake you out of that position once it's become entrenched. So do you find do you feel that power, as it were?
Well, because I spent the first 10 years of my career working with composers, I understand so intimately how the phenomenon of temp love can hinder
temp love.
Yes,
everyone's had temp love in their lives at some point, Jack, in one way or another.
I think the best way into music editing is through working with composers because it gives you a window into what they're going to face once they come into the project. To the extent that I have any power, I try to relinquish it as soon as humanly possible because I understand what the composer has to be faced with. And so even if we find a piece of temp that is the greatest thing ever, and all of a sudden the movie is just working and it's gangbusters, I always try to remind the filmmakers. I always say to them, if you like this, just imagine how much you're going to like it when it's even better. You have to always remind people that just because something is good, it does not mean that it's the best it can possibly be. And, your mind will be blown by how much this is going to be improved on, even if you think that we've perfected it. Making a movie is working with an organism that is ever evolving. And all you can do is nurture the living organism and watch it as it comes of age. And Ron Howard told me this once. There's a point where you can no longer control the organism, and it's just going to go off and be what it's going to be. And so getting stuck on a great piece of temp or getting stuck on something early in the process is a disservice to the growth of the of the living organism.
Yeah, that's a great way of explaining it.
Is there sort of steps that you can take? Obviously, I know you mentioned sort of avoiding, certain bits from Hans Zimmer's library and stuff. But I mean, I've certainly worked on projects where you end up saying, okay, it just needs to go slightly more back towards the temp because obviously that piece did work really, really well. Is there any other things that you can do to sort of resist that? Like, would you even suggest, if you don't have someone as skilled as yourself working and you've just got the editor working on the temp music, could they pick more monotonous stuff that is more maybe tonal? I didn't know if, rather than something that feels almost fully fleshed out and iconic.
I think that's a great question. I think the answer to that question comes really to melody and tunes. If you put in a piece of music that has a easily understandable and relatable melody, if you put in a piece of E.T. and all of a sudden your movie is going and you hear da 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 da.
I'm loving it already.
Right, you're right. So an audience is going to latch onto a melody, and so I think that I try to avoid strong melodic music when I'm doing a temp, because that's the secret sauce of what a composer brings. I mean, Hans would always say, my job is to write 5 notes that people are going to relate to, or that these characters are going to be defined by. And that's the hardest part of the job, really. All of the bells and whistles of orchestrating and everything else is secondary to what are those 2 notes? Why does Jaws go da-dum, and why does that work? That's the meat and potatoes of what a good film composer does. And so if you extract theme and melody into your temp score, then you're adding a very, very bright layer of paint to the thing. And so I would say, in answer to your question, Dan, you should stick with not monotonous, because nobody wants something that's monotonous, but something that is maybe less defined by melodic and tuneful content than it is just sort of a tapestry, wallpaper feels pejorative.
It's tonal. Yeah, so it becomes tonal. Yeah.
And there are lots of composers that do that extremely well, that write more kind of pads and chords that sort of create an emotion without giving you E.T., or without giving you Indiana, whatever the case may be.
So much fun. So we now got the composer. So composers come in and they've sat down with you guys. They've watched it. You've talked about maybe the temp uses music when actually we don't want music, or maybe we want less here, more there. You've talked, I suppose, tonally about why you chose that bit of temp and what you were trying to achieve with it. So they're leaving with as much information as they can, I suppose. And then what's the next bit of the process?
Well, so then the next bit of the process is they go into the lab and start writing stuff. And I think a good composer will, much in the same way that I will try to look through the library without having the movie on, I think a good composer will come away from the spotting session and come away from watching the movie, turn the movie off, and just start writing based on what their emotional intuition has now become from being exposed to the movie. And so I think a good composer will write what we like to call suites away from picture. Maybe it's a 5-minute piece of music. And I think a good filmmaker, a good director, should be able to listen to that suite away from the movie and close their eyes and say, oh my God, you've just nailed this character, or you've just nailed, and then, so that's the ideal, is music will be judged for music's sake. And then the composer will start to write actual cues and write music to the picture and start presenting that music in multiple meetings with the filmmakers. But you have to remember that when you're writing music to a scene, you are constricted right off the bat because of the length of the scene and the shape of the scene. So it's much more effective for a composer to write a piece of music unencumbered by the boundaries of the scene, and then once that theme or once that idea is liked by everybody, then start adapting it and making variations of it for the actual scenes. And so that's the ideal scenario. And then we start going back and forth and showing the music to the director. And hopefully things start to get approved and things start to make their way into the movie little by little. The demos, they're all going to be done with a computer. And slowly but surely you start to create the original score.
And I suppose, are you sorry, Dan, are you like almost like a translator? Because I'd imagine it's almost, a composer submits a piece of music for a particular cue, and then it shows the director. The director, I suppose, may not like it, but almost may not be quite aware why they don't like it musically. That might be the first thing. Or maybe the director's going to say stuff that literally artistically, if a composer's in the room, they just feel offended by. Do you act as almost like an interface in that relationship? And if so, how does that work?
100%. I think the music editor takes on a translation role, because a good music editor will be able to speak the language of music, harmony, rhythm, keys and tempos and all the rest of it. And also will be able to speak the language of editing and story. And a filmmaker will generally not have the technical knowledge to talk about music from a theoretical point of view. And so if the director doesn't like something, sometimes the music editor can be an indispensable person in translating what that dislike means in terms of music. It's not that they don't like the piece of music. It's just that they didn't really like when you went to the diminished chord in bar 34, and then all of a sudden we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're figuring out why musically. So the music editor can be an important role there. And also the music editor can be a kind of support system for the composer to take what they learned from creating the film score and apply it to this new process. So when I'm working with a composer, I'll spend a lot of time on the couch in the back of the room, just looking at the movie, listening to what they're doing, and talking through what might work and what might not work. Not giving them a decree, but telling them, based on all of the intuition that I've developed by being part of the process earlier, why certain things might be useful and why certain things might be sort of heading in the wrong direction. So,
because I can imagine if I was a composer and you're sitting on that couch and I start doing something and you listen to it and you go, well, actually, I used something like that in the temp and they got rid of it, that actually just saves me loads of time. It's like they don't like that kind of thing. They find that too, whatever it is, stumpy, bumpy, or airy, or whatever the words that
stumpy, bumpy is perfect. Yeah.
The directors use these kind of words. They're like, it's too thumpy or it's too airy and it doesn't mean anything musically, that you're being that interface. I think it's fascinating.
Well, that's just it. And also, I love working with younger composers because a lot of the times they're terrified about this part of it. They want to make sure that what they write is the right thing. They want to do a great job. And so to have that, if the project has the budget for a music editor, young composers are generally extremely happy about that because they have a shoulder to not cry on, but a shoulder to bounce ideas off of. There's a great music editor named John Finkley, who was an early mentor of mine. And I remember I was on a tube, actually. We were coming back from Air Studios. We were on the Northern Line from Belsize Park down to Goodge Street, I think it was. And he said, you know something, Jack? This job that we have, it's hundreds of years old. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, you have to understand that you don't think that Mozart was getting notes from the king or the whoever commissioned his music. The composers always needed somebody to help them, to talk through ideas, and I found to be so moving because it's part of a longer heritage of what composers need in order to do their job. Now, experienced composers don't want somebody sitting on the couch. They'd rather just get the job done. They know exactly what they need. But some composers will really benefit from having that relationship. And I find that relationship to be special and a delight, and some composers I've worked with, I've developed that relationship with, and it's a wonderful thing. It really is. And
so you get to the point where everyone's happy with a score, I suppose, that the composer's made in a sort of synthetic environment. And then at what point, or what role do you play in sort of bringing on board orchestras, musicians, all of that stuff?
So then the job becomes very logistical, and there's lots of spreadsheets, and there's lots of keeping track of stuff. It takes on its most kind of organizational part in the phase that you're just now describing, because it's one thing to have the score written and to have all the music developed. It's a whole other thing to then organize all that music to be recorded and mixed and gotten prepared for the final dub or final mix of the film. So I'll spend that time just creating endless lists of, okay, in order for us to record this music, we need to know how many minutes of woodwinds there are, how many minutes of strings there are. How do we organize a scoring session so that we can do it with the money that we have and we don't waste time and that we can get it all done in 5 days or whatever the case may be. And I realize that I'm describing something that a lot of young filmmakers won't have access to, which is the ability to record a score, but they will have to record it in some way. And they will have to prepare it in some way. So what I'm describing actually applies to everybody. The process of getting the score ready to be mixed and to be put into the movie in a final way is a very organizational and logistical process. And it's kind of fun because you've been doing a huge amount of creative work up till that point. So it's kind of nice to say, okay, let's get down to the business of delivering this thing. So then we'll go off and record it. And there can be orchestras, there can be soloists that come in and record stuff, maybe a vocalist, maybe a choir, maybe a guitar player. All these elements get recorded, and then they all get dumped on the score mixer, and the score mixer will put them all together and stem them out to be delivered to the final mix. And my role during all that process is to just keep everything together, because things can start to unravel in that process. You have other people being brought in, orchestrators, copyists. Copyists are the people that actually put the notes on the page to be given to players. You have studio people, you have engineers. The complexity has just increased exponentially. You've gone from a very intimate thing to a business thing. And that can become unwieldy unless the music editor is there to just make sure everything is tightly corseted together for the final mixing of the movie. And then we go to the final mixing stage and we blend the music with the rest of the sound. So we blend it with the dialogue, the Foley, the sound effects, and everything comes together on what we call the final dub. And the soundtrack for the movie is created. And then that's the last part of the process. And then we're done.
And then you have a party.
And then we have a party, and then we all say, I never want to watch this movie ever again.
So does the music go two ways in a way? Because obviously most soundtracks always generally end up on, I was going to say CD, but nowadays obviously Spotify and all the different streaming platforms. Does that go to a specific music producer to make those versions of the songs, and then do you get like the same information go your way, or does it go to that sort of person first and then you get those songs from them? How does that work?
Actually, and I'm doing this right now because I just finished Mathew Vaughn's movie Argylle a few months ago, and we're putting together the soundtrack right now. And so the soundtrack will often be a process where the composer and the music editor and the composer's team will take all the music and start making new edits that are more they're more catered to just a listening experience. So a lot of times a cue from a movie will have gestures and things that were only there because of something happening on the screen. If you're listening to that in the car, you're like, this is not a piece of music. It feels disjointed. So we'll start to create soundtrack edits. And then once those are arrived at, then they'll get sent to a mastering person who will make them a bit more listenable in a car or on your phone or whatever. There's a different way of producing and mastering music for that kind of listening experience than there is in the surround environment of a film. So that happens with the composer, but also with a mastering engineer at the very end.
And is the music generally mixed in 5.1 for the film version, or is it generally sort of a central stereo type mix?
Usually we mix the stems in 5.1, and then the dubbing mixer, the person who mixes everything together, will then take that material and start to put it in the room in strategic ways. A lot of times the rooms are 7.1 or even Dolby Atmos, which is like 50 speakers everywhere. But what we deliver tends to be 5.1, and then that can be pulled apart and panned around the room.
Is there a particular type of instrument that you go for as being like the rear sort of sound? Is like a little tiny triangle choir at the back? Or
if you've got choir, that's got to be on the ceiling, obviously. So the number of times we've taken choir and put it right above the audience to create that kind of angelic effect. That's one of the oldest tricks in the books. And then you'll also, you'll want to pull things off the screen a little bit, because if you want to be able to hear the dialogue, but also feel
you sort of
music,
avoid that center.
That's right. So try to get things away from the center channel, maybe pull them back a little bit into the room to create an immersive effect that doesn't damage the intelligibility of the dialogue, but also retains the emotional effect of the impact of the music. Stuff like that happens all the time.
And 5.1 and 7.1 is referring to the amount of kind of speakers. So people at home might be familiar, if you buy a 5.1 system, you will physically have 5 speakers, so one in the center, 2 at the sides, 2 at the back, and 7.1 is 7. And there's probably more than 7, are there? Is there another system, or is that the max?
The Atmos.
With 7.1, can you guys hear me? I think the network's a little bit struggling at the moment. I hope you can hear me. With 7.1, there's 7 speakers plus the 0.1 is the subwoofer. So you have 1 on the screen and then 2 on the sides and the backs and in the fronts as well.
I feel like 7.1, it felt like they were trying to do something alongside Blu-ray. So it's like, here's your better image, and now here's 2 more speakers. But from like a commercial standpoint, I feel like 7.1 at home didn't catch on so much. But I think 7.1 is implemented in a lot of cinemas, right? It sort of became
It is. 7.1 and Atmos are implemented in cinemas, just depending on the size of the cinema and what kind of equipment they have. But we mix it for all the different formats because it has to go out to the world, and every theater will be different. I always like to try to do the mix where you have the iPad in the front of the room and you put the whole movie on the iPad, because so many people are watching that way. You're making sure that it sounds right in that stereo environment.
Yeah.
And you talked about the Mathew Vaughn relationship, because obviously you've worked with the British director Mathew Vaughn for all of his movies. Well, pretty much all of them. 8 of them, you said?
I can't believe it's 8, but yes,
that's
8 films.
crazy.
Wow.
And in fact, I hadn't seen Kickass until I watched it last week, and I really enjoyed it. Brilliant fun. Check it out if you haven't watched that movie. But I kind of imagine that once you've worked with a director on the process that we've just outlined and you get trusted, that must be a beautiful relationship that kind of it works. Is that why it goes on and you just keep reusing the same thing? Because you guys have formed a rapport, almost you have an intuition, you know what he wants, etc.
That's exactly right. And with Mathew, that relationship is very important because he's trying to achieve a very specific thing. A lot of the time there's an irreverence and a chaotic element to his filmmaking, which plays really well. And there's a shorthand that we've developed to talk about things. And there's experiences from previous movies that he'll want to recall in a problem that exists in the current movie. And having that history just makes the process a lot smoother, and it also makes it more creative. So yeah, that's probably my longest director relationship by far at this point. And I'm very grateful for it. And I'm grateful for the trust he has in me, because I think he looks to me as an important and indispensable part of his process. So that's wonderful for a music editor, because sometimes you don't get that kind of relationship, or you don't get viewed as a key creative. You get viewed more as a kind of crew member who's just doing the important work behind the scenes. So when I get the opportunity to be viewed in that light, it's incredibly rewarding.
And I can imagine that working on the Kingsman films must have been a lot of fun. A lot of our listeners will have seen those movies. Can you tell us a little bit about what was the particular challenge, I suppose, of the Kingsman movie?
Well, I think the biggest challenge with the Kingsman movies was it's a spy franchise. And when you think about spy movies, you think about James Bond. It's impossible not to. And so the question was, how can we create a new sound for these characters that gives people that kind of wink that you'd expect from a spy movie, but reinvents it? And what we did on that first movie was try to come up with themes that felt new and exciting and very emotional, but also kind of alluded to the tropes, the expectations from the spy genre. And I think it was very effective. And we drew on those for the other Kingsman movies, and we kind of expanded on them. And I said the word irreverence with Mathew. I think that's a big part of the effect of his movies, is that they just feel like that he's not following any rules. And that's what's so, I think, appealing about his movies. And that extends to the music, is that let's not follow any rules. Let's just try something crazy and see what happens. And
do you sometimes do that in an attempt where you actually use a sort of song, like a pop song or a kind of rock track, as opposed to a piece of like movie soundtrack stuff? And do you stick it in? And can you remember, was there an example of something in Temp that you stuck in and were like, oh yes?
Well, I mean, the biggest one from Kingsman, the first one, is when Colin Firth goes into the church and and massacres all those people. It's a very violent scene that I wouldn't recommend showing to your children, but it's also one of the coolest scenes, and that's all done to Freebird, and so it's like one of the most famous American classic rock songs ever, and it's just playing, and it's playing on all cylinders, and then of course in Kickass, the greatest example of that was that he used an Elvis song at the end when Hit Girl goes in and also massacres he like
massacre music. It's massacre music.
Loves a massacre to pop.
But I mean, Tarantino was that was a big thing. Like it was the music to violence, which I suppose almost was kicked off by. I mean, thinking about it, you'll have many more examples, but the famous one is the Stanley Kubrick Clockwork Orange, where during the violence and they use the Singing in the Rain track, which, as I understand it, was something that the actor was actually singing on set. It was almost like it was accidental.
I have not heard that story, I'm embarrassed to say, but that sounds very Kubrickian that would happen on one of his movies. And I think that the idea of using songs, pop songs or recognizable songs juxtaposed with violence is obviously it takes the edge off, and it creates satire, and it creates playfulness, and it creates style and genre. And, there's obviously no coincidence why Scorsese has made a career of those kinds of choices with songs in his movies, and Tarantino, and also Mathew. It's a whole lot of fun to watch violence set to a pop song as compared to violence set to serious music. You want to be able to you want to remove the reality, hopefully from.
Especially if it's the good guys that you're meant to align with, it's like important that you don't see them as like violent criminals, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, and you'll when Argyle comes out, you'll see some fun of that as well, But the Hit Girl example is crucial, because seeing a 9-year-old girl kill a bunch of people is pretty disturbing. But when there's actually it wasn't Elvis, it was the banana.
Is that was it that la 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 la?
Yeah. Elvis comes on later when Kick-Ass shows up at the end for the big triumphant conclusion of it.
Yeah. With Kingsman, did you sort of actively avoid using any James Bond to temp score it to sort of avoid that, or did you embrace that, or was that an example of something that you might bring in, but shift sort of the key and manipulate a little bit?
I think it was very important to avoid it. because I mean, talk about temp love. It's like once you have ding 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 ding, then you're going to be like, okay, we need to do something like that. So again, it gets back to what I was saying before about internalizing something before you execute. It's like we all know what James Bond internally means to the culture and the zeitgeist. So what can we if we put a syringe in that and extract whatever DNA there is from that, how can we apply that DNA to this rather than taking the thing and just copying it? And that's what I think. There's only 12 notes after all, right? So you're limited by and hundreds of years of music. So you're always going to be borrowing in some way based on your intuition or based on what inspired you as a younger person. And so that's an inevitable. Anybody who says that, oh, there's too much plagiarism in music doesn't understand that, well, we're at a place right now in our culture where all we have are the references of music that we know. And so what is plagiarism? Well, if you borrow from the spirit of something, that's not copying, that's writing a love letter to it, unless you actually copy the notes. So there's a difference there. And I think that we try to do that a lot with film music. And that's hopefully what the temp can inspire is what did we learn from the spirit of that? And then how can we apply that to something original?
So let's just tilt our focus as we sort of move towards an end here, towards kind of how you got into this fantastic world. I mean, just talking about it, I found this so fun because I think putting music on stuff is like one of the most fun things you can do in a film. So I suppose before we kind of come back to teenage you, maybe you could talk a little bit about, because I mean, when we met and we were talking about this, we were saying there's many young people who develop an interest in, they may start an interest in music. Maybe they play an instrument, maybe they're musical, and they think, I want to get into film, I love films, and they want to marry these two. And often they only think, we see this Young Film Academy, they think that a composer is really the only thing you can do in movies with music. But obviously, as we've heard from you, that's not true. So can you give us a sense of sort of just the technical skills that you've got and the kind of skills, so if someone's listening, they're going, oh, that's sort of like me, and maybe what you love about your role versus other roles and why you chose it?
Well, that is the question. I think that music editing requires you to be, if you want to do it at a gratifying and high level, you need to be motivated by storytelling. Hans Zimmer once told me, film music is 30% music. I didn't understand that when he told me, but now I intimately understand it now. Film music is about telling story using the vehicle of music to help do that. That is your ingredient that you have at your disposal to help tell the story that some director is trying to tell. So I think if you want to do music editing, you want to look at a movie and understand and be motivated by the stories that are trying to be told. It's all about story. Story comes first. And then secondary to that is a background in music. I think that you want to understand the fundamental theoretical elements of music. Having played piano a little bit earlier in life would be handy, because ultimately you're going to be discussing music, and discussing music always is going to come down to discussing harmony and discussing chords, discussing the shape of a melody, the rhythm of a phrase, the tempo of something, et cetera, et cetera. So that's an important skill set. And then also understanding how movies are made, how editorial works. What does it mean when they cut a shot out of a scene? Why did they do that? What were they trying to achieve? Are they trying to make things faster, or are they trying to make things have a different effect? And once you understand the dynamics of why editorial choices are being made, then you can accommodate those choices with the music. So the music always is secondary to the other parts of the filmmaking process, whether it's storytelling or editing or any of the other production elements. And then once you get into the music, it's handy to be able to discuss and understand what makes the constituent parts of music. So I think those are sort of the elements that are good skill sets to have. If that answered your question, James, I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I think it does, because I think, and you've demonstrated so well just in this conversation. It's about having, because there will be a lot of people who are really good at music or have a real sense of music, but they don't have a sense of story, and they maybe don't have the political people skills that you need to be that interface between directors and composers. Because it sounds like you're doing a lot of things there that are not just being a wonderful creative musical person.
Those are the parts that I try to do. I mean, there's different flavors of music editing. My goal is to try to have the skills for all of them, so I can be seen as somebody who can do it all. That's my goal. I don't think I'm there yet, but I'm constantly striving to learn all the different elements of the job. And you mentioned a really important one, which is, when you're if there's a tense meeting happening where a scene is being discussed or something is being discussed, and there's tension because maybe it's not working, nobody wants somebody in the room whose energy is going to be a hindrance to that process. So, and there's no way to teach this. You just have to have had experience in those rooms. Like, do the people want you in the room? Are you contributing? Is your personality helping? Are you being a positive force for positive evolution of the movie? Or are you kind of just wasting their time by sitting there? And developing that skill is a sort of intangible thing, and you just have to be thrown into it a couple times. The fear of those moments, to be able to get those skills and to be able to earn the trust of the filmmakers around you, so that when you open your mouth and contribute something, they take it seriously, and it's actually a contribution rather than just waffle,
And there's so many skills there that you've covered. So looking back at your teenage years, because that's what we try and do here, is kind of think, there's a lot of young listeners out there, and everyone evolves across their life. But, looking back to your teenage years, what do you think, what were you up to, first of all, if anything, in this area? You don't have to tell us the bad stuff. And what were you up to? You now look back and think, weirdly, that really kind of, you can see the genesis of the skills that you now use and what you were developing.
What's funny, though, James? You say the bad stuff, but I actually, and this is going to sound absolutely crazy, but I was a big raver, electronic music, crazy, kid going to all these like warehouses and listening to DJs. And by the way, I still love drum and bass. I love drum and bass music with every ounce of my being. I still listen to it to this day. And when I was younger, I was really motivated by how DJs blend music and how they get from one place to another. And how electronic music is built up from all these little elements. And to be perfectly honest with you, a lot of the creative work I do, music editing, is very much similar to the train of thought that a DJ or a producer has when they put together that kind of music. You're trying to just blend elements in a way that's coherent, and then hopefully you'll help tell a story by doing that. So I've never even thought about this until now, but I guess now that you've asked, those early years of partying and listening to that kind of music and being entranced by the DJ and how stuff was blended was a big part of it. I also grew up playing jazz piano, and so I had a musical background, and I love music, and I wanted to study music, but then I got I got sidetracked by math, as it turned out. I studied math in college, and then I ended up getting a master's degree in mathematics, which I know sounds nuts, but I went off on a big tangent down the business route, and then kind of circled back to being creative and being in film much later in life. But I guess if I was to take a trip back to those years, it would be the DJ, the jazz piano, loving music, and just kind of being intrigued by how stuff gets put together. Because math is like that too. It's all about structure.
Well, there's a real maths and music tie-in, isn't there? I mean, apparently, not that I have either brain particularly, but that once you do maths well, music becomes a lot simpler for you.
Well, that's right. And in music editing, math is crucial because you're dealing with a lot of numbers all the time. If I've got a piece of music that fit over this scene, and now they've cut the scene down and I have to conform the music to fit the new scene, how do I get it all to work, and what tempos need to change and all that? And how does the structure remain together? That's all very mathematical. And so unbeknownst to me, the training I got through mathematics and all that stuff actually has really benefited me, but I wouldn't have ever known that doing it at the time.
Yeah, amazing. And so you can choose, by the way, we always ask our guests to go back in time to their teenage selves to give them a piece of advice. So you can choose a particular method of travel. What would be your time machine of choice here, Jack?
Oh, that's a tough one. The first thing I thought was rollerblades, because who doesn't like to surf? And I think they're coming back. But I like to surf. And so let's change that. I'm going to take my magic surfboard and ride back in time that way.
And if you go through a particular wave at a particular moment, then when you emerge through the other side of the water, the dinosaurs are back.
I'm not that old.
We got ourselves a movie.
We're right with you. So what would be the advice that you would whisper in teenage Jack's ear, knowing what you know now?
Oh, I know exactly what it would be. Whatever the task is that's been given to you, do that, put your head down and do that task and over-deliver on that task. And it does not matter how complex the task is or whether you feel you're doing something high level enough or not. If somebody says to you, please, can you get me a cup of tea? You put your head down and you make the best cup of tea you've ever made, and you just focus on that one thing. Because here's the reality. It took me a while to understand this. Here's the reality of any career. It's not even film career. If somebody takes a sip of that cup of tea and they say, oh, that kid nailed it, then the next thing that goes through their mind is, I can give that kid a task that has a slightly higher degree of complexity. That's it. And then the next task will be a little bit more complex. And so, okay, you're not making a movie, but who cares? You do that task and you over-deliver on that task. You just focus on it. You take initiative. You don't ask people how to do it. You figure it out, and you over-deliver 120%. And then the person you give that task to says, oh, that person can do something slightly more complicated. 200 of those, and you've got a career. And the number of kids that I meet that don't understand that simple fact, and it's a fact. This is an empirical fact. That don't understand that, and they're frustrated that they're not doing something more, and they're not focusing on the current thing that's been put in front of them. I meet people like that all the time, and so what I would tell 16-year-old Jack is just over-deliver on the thing that you're doing now, and that's it. And don't worry about what else is out there and what else might be in the future. Just focus on the thing you're doing now and over-deliver on that. So that's what I would tell myself.
I think that's great, because we actually often talk about that sense of no one has you can never visualize when you're in your teens, what your life will be. All you can do is go from one stepping stone to another stepping stone and then trust that the bridge builds itself. So and that's really what you're talking about, is just do it well, and then the bridge will build itself to the next thing. But if you do it well, it will open up. The bridge
completely builds itself, and you have to have faith in that. I think that's a beautiful analogy. I'm going to use that because it's true. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the plan is going to have in store for you. All you can do is focus on the thing that's right in front of you. I didn't know what music editing was when I got that assistant job with the composer that I worked with in the first years of my career. I didn't even know what the job was. I hope that your listeners now have a better understanding of what the job is, because I think the secret here is that music editing is one of the coolest gigs you can get in film and television. There's a huge amount of work. It's creative. You can make a good living. There's a huge demand for it, as I say. But I didn't know that it even existed. And so I had to just do those little things that I was doing at the time and nail each one of them to have that door open to me and to have that bridge be built in front of me. So that's exactly right. Don't focus too much on what is possible. Just focus on what you're doing in that moment, and then things will be revealed that otherwise wouldn't be.
Amazing.
Thank you so much, man. This has been amazing. Thank you for sharing your experiences, taking the time. I've loved it. I've learned tons, as always. Thank you so much.
That was really great. Thank you, Jack.
I'm actually sad that this is over, because I've had so much fun. And thanks for inviting me, guys. I hope that people can listen to this and be inspired by it. And thank you for the work that you're doing, because if we don't inspire the young filmmakers out there, then we won't get the next generation of Spielbergs and all the rest of it. So,
well, also, let's face it. I mean, we'll be stopped by now. But AI, AI must be. Is that a worry for you? Seriously, does AI do your job?
Well, AI does all of our. AI does all. Yeah.
Well, apparently not. No, 70%. As I read it, 70% is the least likely within I think it's 30 years would have been completely replaced by AI, and it's archaeology.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, look, when I say AI does everybody's job, what I mean is there are tools for all of our jobs that are artificial intelligence. I mean, I use apps and things in Pro Tools that are a version of AI. So it's already happening. Whether a chat GPT can create the temp score to Wicked is left to be seen. I think that they could probably get to a point where, sure, they could sift through the library and find a piece of music that fits in a certain scene. But will you have the back and forth with the director, the spirit of collaboration, the energy inside of a room that you need to discover where the movie needs to go from this point? I don't know. I hope not, because that's the best part of the job and the most special part. But I think it's a threat for all of us, and to ignore the threat is unwise. And luckily, in these resolutions to the strikes that we've seen, people are acknowledging the threat and doing something about it. So hopefully, we continue to be vigilant and protect as many jobs as we can.
And we know that Wicked will have a human music editor. We know that for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate this.
You know what struck me, James? I was thinking of like my indie films that I've sort of worked on, and you know, in those there is just one guy or girl sort of working on the soundtrack, and it's almost like the more successful you get, the more there are other people around to help make you a success. You know, it's almost like Jack's like setting up the serve, like he's throwing the ball up in the air so the composer can sort of hit I was going to say a slam dunk, but that's half just converge sort of two separate sports there. They can hit an ace, and there are all these other people around you fulfilling all these different parts that really do make the music a success and make it what it is, which I think is just really, really impressive.
Well, I suppose it's like layers, isn't it? When you've got the budget to have a Jack, because I think, as you mentioned during the interview, like when most people, when they start off, the editor will do the temp.
Yeah.
And often the temp is some library music that maybe it isn't temp, it is perma. I mean, It is the only music that you'll have. So as soon as you have the budget to be layering and have skill sets like Jack's, where you're bringing someone in to kind of bring in this huge knowledge of all of the music that's gone before, synthesize it down to something that's as close to the director's vision as they want it to be, and then be able to work with the composer who's bringing in their new level on top of that, and help that that composer to bring the best version of their skills that's right for that project, because actually the music editor's been on the project longer and they really understand the DNA and the genesis of it. And then you can have them sort of do that stuff, who's sort of holding their hand a bit and reassuring or doing whatever, and through to all the orchestral scoring, through to bringing all the pieces together. I mean, then the more people you have, and then hiring an orchestra, and then you bring the musicians in who bring their own interpretation of the music that's been written. And I mean, that was one of my great days. My film career was being in recording studios with these orchestras. They're the most unbelievable places. I mean, these musicians are so skilled. They come in, they've never seen the music before. They walk in, they literally tap, tap, ready to go, cue one, go. And it's just unbelievable. Sounds incredible. You're in the studio and you're like, oh my God, it's amazing. And then they just stop. And because it's all done per hour of cost, so it's costing a ton of money because you're paying the musicians, the studio, the engineers, everyone. I've never seen such amazing communication. So you've got people inside the studio who very quickly, the equivalent of Jackson's studio. So the director will say something stupid, usually like, it's too thumpy, or I didn't like this, or the composer's doing it. And then they get translated straight back to the musicians in technical music language. The composers, the conductor says something, they go, right, go again. And they've only stopped for 90 seconds, and then they just go again, and it sounds different. And literally it's things like they're going, cut the string, and at bar 78, no heart, on that, do that, we don't want that, go. They do it, and then they go, great, thank you very much, cue 2, go. And they just sight reading, and off they go. It was mega.
That sounds like almost like a nightmare that I would have. That I sort of, when I was younger, I got a fun little story, James. When I was younger, I played violin, and I was in the school orchestra, and I just, the pressure of playing it live, I found a bit much.
So I sort of just copied the motion and the arm movements of the person sitting in front of me, and just made it seem like I was playing the violin.
Were you still hitting
I mean, I
the
was
strings,
making
though?
some noise. I was making some noise, but I don't think the right noises. And and I did that several times, and obviously the people in front of you, they actually are playing more advanced music. And I saw the composer lady, the conductor, go and have a word with my parents, and I was like, oh no, I've been caught, sort of thing. And then I spoke to my parents afterwards, and they said, yeah, they asked us if music runs in the family because he's so good. He's playing the advanced stuff without even like he's ahead. He's playing the music of the advanced kids in the row in front of him. He's so good. And little did they know, I was emulating the people in front of me because it was quite stressful. I could play very simple stuff, but not very well.
My version of that story is I got given a keyboard when I was a kid.
Yeah.
It was the basic early keyboards, and it had a demo button. And if you press the demo button, it would play this amazing thing. It didn't make the keys go up and down, but you just play it.
Yeah.
I remember getting my grandfather in and saying, "Hey, Grandad," I must have been about sort of 7 or 8 going, I think I'm really good. And then I'd quietly hit the demo button. They didn't see it, and then I'd pretend to play on the keyboard. And I thought he completely fooled him. Of course, he knew exactly what I was doing. But in my mind, I fooled him.
You'd turn yourself into a real musical hero.
Yeah,
there was actually the guy from Gorillaz, the guy behind Gorillaz. He did a talk with the Apple Music DJ. I forgot his name, Zane Lowe, and he talked him through the creation of some of the early music. And he pulled out this old sort of like one of those old school keyboards that had those demo things. And he showed that like their most iconic song, it was literally a loop that was built into the keyboard, and he was just like, "Oh, that's cool." And then that was the basis of one of their biggest hits, which I think is very funny.
That's so funny.
I actually have one really fun anecdote, by the way, about John Williams, because I know obviously Think Bobby got to meet him. That I felt I had to share on this particular episode that I feel like you'll love. I don't know if you know this, but when Steven Spielberg made Schindler's List, he showed the early cut of the film to John Williams, I think without music, and he showed him the whole film, and John Williams said, "You need a better composer than me for this film," and Spielberg said, "I know, but they're all dead." Which I think is somewhat beautiful and poetic.
Wow,
and lovely.
That is
basically saying he's the best alive at the time, but in a very morbid, humorous way. So that's my little John Williams story for you. I think the listeners will enjoy. Sorry, back to you.
I mean, I just thought it's very cool that Jack had worked with John Williams, and what a legend he is. I just thought it was another. I suppose my takeaways from it were, what a fun job again. I mean, I was struck by just. We've talked to a lot of people, and sometimes you listen to people talking, they're like, wow, that is just, I mean, I can see why it's brilliant, but that felt like a lot of fun. And I mean, there's a huge amount of skill and hard work and all that stuff, but, we see at Young Film Academy that thing, where it's putting the music on and getting the power to have temp to a big movie. If you're working on Captain Phillips, or you're working on Eddie the Eagle, or Captain America, or these amazing movies that Jack's worked on, and you are getting the picture and literally going, have a play with that, interpret music for this movie.
Yeah.
What a fun thing to do. And to know that you're also influencing everyone who steps in those same... It's a bit like walking through the snow. You get up on a snowy morning and it's deep snow, and the first footsteps, basically those will be the ones that everyone uses because it's like a path. It's very difficult for someone to form a whole separate set of footsteps, and Jack is kind of the first person to step musically on that virgin snow.
Yeah.
That's
cool. 100%. It's one of the most fun parts as well of editing as well. Sometimes is sort of bringing it to life with music and exploring the options. It's quite nice to hear that sort of the further up you go, there are people with far smarter musical minds that can sort of invest in the film at that stage early on alongside sort of the editor. I thought it was really inspiring, and sort of hearing about that process. It was very cool. Very
Yeah,
cool. I can't help wonder if it feels sacrilege though. If you take like a really iconic piece of music and you're going to put it in the temp, and then you start editing it and changing it, does that feel like? Do you feel bad? Like, does your soul?
So if you take a bit of film score and you sort of transpose it into a different key, or you mess about with it, or
if it's something really iconic, whether you feel like, I shouldn't be touching this masterpiece,
But I suppose
obviously that's part of the joy, isn't it?
Well, that's one of the things that Jack was mentioning, wasn't it? That there's certain things that are too iconic you don't use in those temp scores, and I thought that was a great note for young filmmakers, especially. It's because also we were laughing, weren't we? But you put some amazing piece from a famous movie on, and then you think you've made a great movie, but you haven't. It's the music is doing all the heavy lifting for you, and when you replace it with something else, you will be disappointed. So I think it was that thing of choosing music that's of the right scale, that whatever you can achieve. Because I think the other thing, which we didn't get time to discuss, is that, and we know this from our experience, that there was a time when if you didn't record with an orchestra or get actual musicians in, it sounded very synthy. I mean, certainly back in my first film's day, when that was the case, you could really tell the synthesized nature of, that's not strings, it's a synth. I mean, we used to call it synthy. And now, Cynthia, things have evolved that, it's actually, it can be really good, that stuff. You don't need, you will hear just a bit more. A real cello will sound more like the human voice. But actually, the synthesized cello can be manipulated, made to sound beautiful. So, which brings music within a lot more achievable budget range, because you can be a one-woman-man band in your bedroom still creating some beautiful stuff.
Yeah, I agree. We got a question, James. This is from Amber, who's 18, and it's from Coventry. Amber wonders, how can I make a soundtrack or a score for my own film? So I think what Amber is asking about is essentially as if she's going to do the music herself. So I know you've got a few thoughts on this, but I just wanted to preempt this before you give a much better answer, to say the one thing you should not do is go on YouTube and type in copyright-free music, because just because it says it's copyright-free, it doesn't mean you can use it. What it generally means is you have to buy a license for it in order for it to be valid as a copyright-free piece of music. It's copyright-free in the sense that once you've paid for it, you can then use it wherever. But most of those tracks, if you actually look in the description, will have a link to the go and buy it. So do not be fooled by the fact that someone has uploaded a piece of music and said copyright-free. And also, just because someone's uploaded it and said copyright-free, that might not even be true. So,
although there are some places where you can go, where you can download music, where it's 100%. Essentially you don't have to pay for any kind of license, as long as it's not for commercial ends. If it's just for your own ends, the festival circuit or educational purposes and things like that. So there's
100%.
Lots of places. But very good point is, do be super careful about the music that you choose, because that is the biggest problem we see with young filmmakers, having taken copyrighted music, putting it on their movie, really enjoying it, and then finding that they can't play it at festivals, they can't play it online, and it's a real problem. So, the uniqueness, I suppose, of music is a big thing, isn't it? That if you can, the very best is if you can actually compose it yourself. And I know that certainly what we did at summer camp for many years, we had a workshop where we actually used tools like GarageBand, which you have built into almost all Mac computers, and that has the functionality to be able to what's called compose to picture. So you can literally have the picture playing whilst you have all the rest of the ability to make music in the GarageBand software. And you can start it, load it up to a particular moment and play it back to a particular moment, move it around very easily. That's all free available software. You can do it on that. Or, of course, you could use a sort of higher-end music-making piece of software. Do you, Dan, help out what those be?
Logic. I like Logic, which is basically GarageBand on steroids, because it's also made by Apple. So I really would recommend it. It's got loads of fake instruments in it that sound really, really nice. And once you start adding some reverb to those instruments, then they start to sound really good and unsynthy, because you start to put them in like a pretend space, basically. Reverb basically being levels of echo. Whenever you record an orchestra, you're not just hearing that sort of clean violin or that flute. What you're hearing is how that sound resounds within a space, and that's sort of what gives orchestrated music that sort of weight and gravitas. So you always want to put your instruments in some kind of space and give it reverb or an echo. That's what I would say.
Yeah, but it's a really fun thing to just try. But and I suppose you can always, if you don't like what you compose, you can then go and find some copyright-free library music or something else as a fallback. But it's worth having a go.
We're not on
We've
YouTube.
also had films at Young Film Academy in which they have recorded in a scene, let's say somebody's actually playing a piano within the scene, and they've recorded putting the microphone close to that person, so they use it for that sequence, but then they use that same music over other parts of the film that they actually recorded during filming, and as long as the recording is good enough, that can work it as well.
Yeah, 100%. James, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure
for joining me along with Jack. There's been a real treat of an episode. We hope you've enjoyed sticking around for this slightly longer episode as we went into even more detail. This was so cool. I love sort of when you think you've chatted with several people and understood a department, the sort of world of that department for me just gets completely broken apart again, and my understanding of how the process works gets almost reinvented in my own mind.
I think if you realise you don't know what you don't know. And so as soon as you know a tiny bit, you realise all the bits you don't know. And then you want to learn more. And then the universe expands out, which is the point of the podcast, right? And we can expand that and investigate these fascinating areas. And it was just brilliant to...
basically, what we're saying, if me and James are learning stuff, then you guys are definitely learning stuff. So it's a real treat. See you next time, James. Take care.
Take care.